Commander, you've received a new message at your private terminal.
Hello there, everyone. Welcome to an all-new episode of Talking Smack, where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, comics, and much, much more. I am your host, Josh Scar, and Alex has the week off this week. I think I saw him sunbathing in a sunbeam somewhere, so I didn't want to disturb him. He just looked too cute. So I am joined by Matt. Matt, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Happy New Year, one and all. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm gonna be a little grumpy today. Maybe, hopefully, not with you guys, because
Oh boy.
we're
All
we're
right.
with some amazing people. Or we are. You and I, Matt, are with an amazing person, a lovely person, some might say. But my neighborhood woke me up at midnight. To peek behind the curtain, we're recording this on New Year's Day, but a bunch of fireworks went off in my neighborhood at midnight, and it freaked out my dog, woke me up, and slept wrong after I went back because I probably went to bed tense and angry, and my neck has been killing me all day.
All right. That's what you get for not being up till midnight.
Yeah. How dare I try
Yeah.
not to get a full night's sleep when my kids are out of the house.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned, we have a lovely person joining us for the subject matter this week. The lovely Dan from Casting Views. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing very well.
Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to all of you as well, yeah.
Dream team is back together, baby.
Yeah, no, glad to be back on here, and especially for the subject matter. So thank you for the invite.
Of course. Well, how else could we talk about 15 years of Mass Effect without the lovely Dan here? I feel like that's half of our conversations away from microphones anymore.
Mass Effect 2, because the first time was 15 years of the first Mass Effect, right?
Yes.
A couple years back.
Yes. And then I believe the day this episode comes out is 15 years to the day for Mass Effect 2. If not, it's the same week.
January 26th, I think I looked it up earlier, is the release day. So
okay, so I think we're like a week ahead of time. Let me pull up the calendar here just to see. Yeah, we're coming out 4 days ahead of it. So next week, the 29th, will be something different, but still we're close enough.
You still have time, still have a few days to get your anniversary gifts and send them out to
BioWare. Don't
Commander.
forget to send us some lovely gifts as well. You know, we put a lot of time, blood, sweat, and tears into these games, and we're putting some extra blood, sweat, and tears into talking about 15 years of this game, or at least I am, because I have to edit this episode.
BioWare, not a sponsor, but could be.
Absolutely should be, yeah.
Absolutely should be, but EA is definitely not going to let that happen. But Dan, we usually have a promo opportunity here, but since you are our promo buddy this week for our Mass Effect episode, I'm just going to let you tell everyone about Casting Views and where they can find you.
You think after 3 years I'd have this down, right? But no. Casting Views, yep, it's a general topic podcast, so it can literally be anything and everything. So week to week, I've had you on to talk about sporting moments that live rent free in your head, and I think that was your idea. I've discussed weird laws, sort of dumb crime, through to sort of some serious ones, like I had Leo Allen on to talk about medical advances, and we've done AI with him as well as a fun one about hot takes and things like that. So yeah, every Sunday. I did have a little bit of a break over December, but as of recording, as of January, I'm releasing again. So yeah, good to be back in the flow, and yeah, no doubt have you on again, you guys on again at some point for a crossover on my side.
And if memory serves, my dinner party episode should be coming out. If not, it has already come out.
Yeah, it will be the final Sunday in January. Yeah.
Okay, so this coming Sunday, that episode will be out in terms of
There
when
you
we
go.
release this episode.
Look at that timing.
So hey, synergy, look at that. We make things work without even trying.
It's almost like I planned it, but yeah.
So Mass Effect 2, let's get into this thing, because I'm sure there will be plenty of other people talking about it, but hopefully we're hitting it at the right time with the anniversary being just a few days away from episode release. And I mean, let's just talk about real quick how hyped were you guys for Mass Effect 2 when the announcement trailer came out? Because I remember the cinematic trailer. BioWare was really big on those back in the day. I went back and rewatched it, but I just remember wanting to know so much more about like who the new Krogan was, who this weird lizard chameleon kind of looking guy, or the guy who ended up being Thane. Like, because those were the two big ones that were promoted in the cinematic trailer. So, like, what did that trailer do for you guys, if you can recall, or if you just have any memory of that?
I don't specifically remember the trailer, although I think, Mass Effect 1 comes out, I think, before my time working in GameStop, but like one of our buddies who was working at GameStop at the time is the one that like hipped me to it. And I was like, he's like, you should pick this up. It's the game from the KOTOR developers. And I was like, yeah, of course. And we all loved it. So by the time 2009, 2010 rolls around, and we know 2 is coming, I am working at GameStop, so I'm like just steeped in that sort of, I always kind of followed gaming, but I'm more steeped in it because I'm like out on the floor selling every day, pushing pre-orders,
Yep.
how it went. So I think I think everybody in our friend group was just super into the first game, and just this idea that they had sort of gestured towards, where you have all of these things that happen in the first game, and maybe not all of them totally resolve, right? Where there's a bunch of lingering
Plot threads,
choices,
yeah.
questions, and yeah, just and in terms of the overall plot as well, where it leaves off in sort of this comparison may come up a lot this episode, but it's sort of the Star Wars thing, right? Where at the end of Star Wars, the evil is defeated, but there's still more to do, right? So there's like a suggestion that like, oh, the fight continues. Similarly, in Mass Effect, you've defeated the main threat, the pressing threat, with the knowledge that like more is coming. So like just knowing that, and like the 3 years between the games, just imagining what that might be, and now it's here. I think all of us, I think we were all still basically living in our hometown at the time. All of us were like just all in, all about it, just generally.
Yeah, you see, for me, I'm similar. I don't necessarily remember the trailer, but for me, Mass Effect was the whole reason for getting an Xbox. At the time, I was on a PC. My PC was very much at the low end. I was struggling to run any games at that point. But it was Mass Effect releasing on the Xbox that finally nudged me into getting a console. And as I said, I got the Xbox specifically for Mass Effect because I was well into my RPGs. Knights of the Old Republic, I think, mate, you alluded to that. Played that on my PC, and yeah, so I think I played the original Mass Effect around 2009. So I was probably just getting into the hype and just coming straight off that, knowing the next game was out. And so much so, I mean, I loved the first game so much so that I got the cleverly named collector's edition of Mass Effect 2. And I think that was probably my first real spend on a sort of a collector's edition of a game, purely because I just wanted as much as I could.
Yeah. And that was like maybe, this is something maybe a separate issue, but that was like almost, I don't remember what all was in that collector's edition. I don't think I got it myself, but I definitely sold some. As I mentioned, we were working at GameStop, but that was like near the end of the time where like collector's editions were like things you might actually want, at least in my opinion. Nowadays, I think like all collector's editions are not very good. So like
It's a lot of digital content and maybe a steelbook.
yeah, so there's like that's a time where I don't think Mass Effect 2's was that insane of a collector's edition, but it was like every single one that came out for games that I was going to get anyway, I was like, ooh, this is really tempting. And it's a matter of whether or not I have the space for a giant statue or the money to shell out on it.
So, Matt, you actually kind of triggered you made me go down memory lane. I think you might have been working at the GameStop at your university, because I was up in Beloit at that time because I was pimping Mass Effect heavily for PS3 at the time, because it was
I think you might be right, actually.
at the time, the original Mass Effect was exclusive to PC and Xbox 360, and it was a big deal that Mass Effect
Yep.
2 was coming to PS3 as well as Xbox and PC. And everyone was like, well, if your choices carry over, like, how does that affect PS3 gamers? And it's because they created an interactive comic book that's supposed to be like 30 minutes where you make the choices throughout the first game, which I actually just recently did because I have the legendary edition on Steam Deck. When you load up Mass Effect 2, you can actually stop the game during the pre-tutorial level and make your choices, and then that will carry over into the game. So that was one way that I think EA and BioWare did a really cool thing. The comic wasn't anything spectacular. It just is whichever version of Shepard you created, narrating and being like, and this is when
Yeah, and all the big
this
choices.
is where I decided, which if I remember, there's one mission where they just completely, is it Pharos? Yeah, the one with the plant. they don't even bother mentioning that in the comic because obviously it has very little effect on the overall story. So like I found that a little interesting that it's an entire mission that they just omit from the comic because I mean, obviously they're saving time. But at the time in the game, it's one of your three big missions you need to start the game with. You have get Liara, go to Novaria and stop Liara's mother, or go and find out what's going on Pharos. And to have the Pharos mission just completely omitted is kind of funny in a way, even though like I completely understand why it's omitted.
That's an interesting thing to remember too. This is also not Mass Effect 2 specifically, but I don't think the first Mass Effect comes to PS3 until after all three are out, and then they sell the trilogy collection on
Yep.
that same generation of consoles. Which is really wild to think about. That like 2 and 3, the idea that this is one big story told over 3 games, sort of, and for like a huge chunk of people playing like the biggest parts of that trilogy, you're not getting the first part until like well after the whole thing is available. That's interesting. I think you are right. I think January, the beginning of 2010 was when I went off to school. So I think like late 2019 or 2009, my last little bit of time before I moved, being hyped with everybody at the Rockford, doxing ourselves, GameStop, and then moving on when the game actually came out. Anyway, sorry, you were about to say something again.
No, I was going to say also the funny thing, if I remember rightly, about the games, especially 2, was they were on multi-discs as well, weren't they? So you were swapping the discs over as well, which is another callback, another little memory that's just triggered, yeah.
Crazy world of console gaming upgrades and how the discs have changed. So let's dive into the story a little bit. So Dan, if you want to, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but if you'd like to let everyone know, how does Mass Effect 2 start?
Starts with probably one of the best missions or one of the best openings in a game for me anyway. Still to this day, when I play it still hits me when you're playing it. So it's you're on the Normandy, aren't you? And comes under attack. The ship comes under attack. It's getting pretty badly ripped apart. And of course, as Shepard, you're saving everyone aboard, and it comes down to there's one final life pod, isn't there? Which you manage to finally convince Joker to get onto, and yeah, as he departs, the ship rips up, and Shepard floats out and dies in space, which, as an opening for a game, to kill your hero off in the first 5 minutes is a pretty bold move, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that EVA walk at the start of it too, that was just BioWare, I think, showing off a little bit. Once you get up the stairs and you're trying to go get Joker, you can see through the ripped canopy of the hull, and you can see the planet to the side, and like there's like electromagnetic storms happening or borealises or something, and it just looks amazing. Even to this day, like it's something that I still just stop and look at, and I'm just like, you're showing off in this moment, and I can appreciate that because you're taking a moment to give us a moment to just be in awe of what you've created, while also still allowing the terror of the moment that's happening to linger.
And it's such an interesting moment. Like, it's such a cool, like, when you really break down like what it's doing for the game, it's like it's serving two masters, sort of, right? Because it's doing that thing that you guys are talking about, but it's also finding a way to give you like a clean break from the first one as an excuse to do a lot of things. Like, here's an excuse to, if you want to totally remake your Shepard that you're possibly importing from the first one, here's your reason. Here's our excuse to give you an entirely new ship instead of just like coming up with some excuse that they gave you a new one or rebuilt the first one or whatever. Here's a reason why you have a bunch of new characters that are not just your same crew from the first one, even though there's a lot of those characters who still show up in various capacities. That's a really good way of like, really hitting with the bang, and then also sort of funneling you into a couple of different ways to sort of subtly reset things for this new adventure.
Yeah, and it like you're saying, it gives a great reason for the technological jumps and why like your armor is a little different. Because one of the big things once we get to after the opening credits, essentially, we find out that it's been 2 years. Shepard died. They have been rebuilt, and Cerberus is trying to fight the Collectors, who are the ones who attacked Shepard's Normandy 2 years prior in the opening sequence.
Which is another, sorry to interrupt, but that's another thing. Cerberus is an organization that in the first game is just mostly a faction that you only interact with in terms of like you're going to a planet and here's a bunch of guys to kill. So like you're also sort of like recontextualizing like these were baddies in the first game and now here you are
Unnecessary
working with
evil, yeah.
them very closely. Yeah.
But even with the opening, as you both said, it is very clever, right? So it avoids the we've just upgraded the ship in between games because we know we needed more rooms for more crew. But it's just a very clever way of doing a lot of things. And as you said, it's very subtle. But for me, the whole Joker wanting to go down with the ship, as it were, because his life is just flying, isn't it? It is that ship, and there's an element of you've spent that entire first game with those characters, and Joker, who by his own name is seen as or it can be perceived as a lesser character, is the one who wants to go with the ship. He wants to do everything he can to save it, and Shepard's having to force him out. And then you get that what's the word? The melancholy music sort of come in as the title appears. So yeah, I think for everything you've all said as well, just for me, still stands to this day as how an opening of a game should be done.
Yeah, and I think in that moment when you're playing it too, you're like, you have no. Obviously, this is a question that gets answered 5 seconds later, but at the moment you're like, are they just gonna is this a new character I'm gonna be playing? Do they just kill me off to shuffle it somewhere else or what? Like it's just for a moment, and obviously now in retrospect we know what's coming because we've played them all. But it's like, oh wow, did they really do that? And then they didn't, but then also they did, right? So have their cake and eat it
I remember
too.
in the lead up to the game coming out, there were rumors that Shepard would die and you would play as a new N7 agent or soldier or whatever. And I mean, in some aspects, those rumors were right, but only in the sense that Shepard dies and then obviously comes back.
And it's not a thing. It's a thing that I think BioWare, I don't know if they had quite done it because that's every Dragon Age game, right? Where you're playing a new protagonist, even though there's theoretically an overarching story that goes between them. And then even though between Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, even though 2 is a different developer, it is also, again, it's a similar kind of thread being connected, but you're playing an entirely new character. So I think Dragon Age 2 might not have been out yet. I don't totally remember the timeline, but there is precedent there where it's like, maybe you won't play as the same guy again, even though they're sort of presenting it as like a bunch of choices you make are going to carry over.
And it's again, as you said, it's a very clever plot or mechanic to separate Shepard from everyone else as well. So he is now in Cerberus, and and you can believe that now because they've brought him back to life. He is the $60 million man or whatever it's called now.
Yeah, right.
And it makes it believable.
Yeah, and as we're thinking about it, I'm also realizing too that it's also sort of a from a role playing perspective. If you decide, you played a goody two shoes in the first game, and you decide you really want to go the opposite direction in this game, that's also sort of a good excuse, right? Where maybe Cerberus messed with him, or maybe he's maybe they're messed up from their experience, or maybe they're just angry for whatever other reason. So there's all kinds of things that it sort of gives the player carte blanche, both change tactics if they want, change play styles, because I think again you can also have the opportunity to change up the class and stuff too. So it's just such a we're kind of circling around this a lot, but just such a clever way to do a lot of things at once.
Yeah, so let's talk classes because over the years we've all had 15 years to play this game. For the longest time, I would just play as the soldier class. I would just run and gun I think one of the things Mass Effect 2 did really well with some of the mechanic change-ups is in Mass Effect 1, I think the biggest problem the game had is that I think they ideally had the idea that, oh, if you're an adept, if you're a vanguard, if you're this or that, your specialties are going to be like shotguns, pistols, or assault rifles. You're never going to be very good at all of them. You're only going to be good with some of them. And Mass Effect 2 went the extra step and said, okay, you're just not even going to have access to some of these because when I started, the reason I started, I played mostly as the soldier classes because I like the assault rifles. I wasn't very good with the sniper rifles, but obviously they're very powerful weapons, so you can use them and do what you need to do with them as you're able. But if I ever played as like the Adept or maybe the Vanguard, I can't remember, the Infiltrator in Mass Effect 2, you pretty much only had access to SMGs and pistols, maybe a shotgun. And I never cared for the shotgun in any of these games, but the assault rifle has always been my thing. So I always played as that. But through over the years, I've kind of learned different play styles and different tactics. And I really dig the Adept class now because you have the throws and the singularity abilities. And I like that they altered how the mechanics of those work because you can like create angles and arches so you can get to guys behind cover. And I think if the game also implements an engine where if you utilize the arc function of an ability, it creates greater force when it impacts. And those are some of the things that really made the gameplay more engaging for Mass Effect 2 for me.
I tend to stick with Soldier. I wish for the amount of times I play the game, I wish I could change the way I play it, but I love playing it the same way. I think I have when I first got it, I remember sort of playing through as both the male and female Shep and doing the Paragon and Renegade runs and experimenting a bit. So I think I did do the Adept and Vanguards as well at the start, just to have a little bit of fun with the biotics. But yeah, I generally tend to. My shepherd is the run and gun shepherd. Yeah,
And it's a really interesting way of like, because the first game, and this is something we'll probably talk about a little bit later. Like the first game is much more rooted in like there's still a lot more married to like the PC RPG like
Mhm.
lineage they're moving from, right? Where like you choose a class and that dictates a lot of like how you play, right? Where some of the weapons aren't going to work as well. If you're a soldier, you probably don't have access to many powers. I don't remember if you get any in the first one at all with soldier, but you know, it's sort of like you're choosing between like a warrior or a mage or
Yep.
a sorcerer or whatever, right? Where you and then in the second one, and then especially in the third one too, they're 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 trying to marry it much more where maybe you aren't locked in quite as much. You have a little more flexibility. If I'm remembering right, correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while since I played it, but um, they're trying to make it so that it's not just you pick one thing and you're kind of locked in, and a lot of that is just kind of down to generally the way they're sort of streamlining a lot of those kind of classic RPG aspects generally. Is that right? Like they don't totally lock you
Yeah,
in
there
in
are
the second
some
one.
aspects where like I literally just finished a playthrough I think like 2 days ago on Mass Effect 2 in preparation for this. And they added in I can't say if this was like a later DLC thing or if that was in the game from the beginning, but they did add an advanced training option once you got like halfway through the game or through the first third of the game. And you could choose to be like again, I this time around I played as an adept, so I only had access to SMGs, pistols, and the heavy weapons that they introduced. In the first collector based mission, I believe, you can find an assault rifle on the ground, and then you have access to changing it up where you can be trained in like assault rifles, sniper rifles, or shotguns, and that might change based on your
Right.
class. Again, I always go with the assault rifle because it's the most efficient weapon in my opinion, or at least with the way I play. So they do open it up a little bit so that you can have access to those weapons that you're more comfortable with or that you think are a better advantage for you. But I think, or at least early on, they try to train you to play within the class confinements.
Yeah, and forgive me if anything I say over the course of this is wrong. It has been. I did not replay for this. I think probably the last time I played any of the games was my big legendary playthrough before the last episode
I
we
think
did
it's
on
still
this.
only
So,
like $8
you know,
on Steam Deck, which if I recall, you got a Steam Deck, so it plays.
I do have my brother gave me a copy when I got my Steam Deck. He knew in advance. My wife told him, so he sent me a copy of it on Christmas Day that year. And I think I've not quite gotten around to wanting to do a whole run again, but it's I got that dog in me. It's coming at some point, you know.
Dan and I have to play at least once a year.
yeah, it is a yearly thing for me.
The Steam Deck makes it so convenient, though. I think I played through it like 3 times this year because I can play through the
Oh
games in
wow!
like
Oh
18
wow!
hours each at this point. So, I did a speed run lookup, and I don't know what the qualifications are for the speed runs, but there are people who have finished the game in like an hour and 20 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of those are probably down to glitches because a lot of speedruns are like about not just doing it as fast as you can, but also like finding the game
Yep.
breaking bugs that get you to credits really early or something. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's like, oh, if you go through a door in this part where you're not supposed to and do a jump or something, you get to the last boss within an hour.
And I'm pretty
something like
certain
that.
a lot of the crew won't survive the end of the game in that speed run.
Yeah, right.
One of the speedruns is everyone surviving, and I
Oh,
think
wow.
that one is still like sub 2 hours.
Wow. Okay.
It's kind of incredible.
Oof.
Which I'm like, that means you do all the loyalty missions and get all the upgrades
Yeah.
in 2 hours. That's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah.
Because you still have to do the mining and the mini game stuff where you're collecting materials.
Yeah, there's got to be
Mm.
some game breaking bug somebody finds that's like, oh, if you go to this part of the map, right, whatever, it automatically levels out your loyalty or whatever, something like that. But is that a good? We talked about the sort of setup for the game, the opening. Should we talk about like the main? You guys mentioned this, who survives.
Yeah, let's get into it, because the main crux of the game is you have to recruit a new squad to go on a suicide mission to take out the collector base. They're abducting human colonies for some unknown reason. And so the Elusive Man has set up some dossiers for you as Commander Shepard to go throughout the galaxy and recruit said crew.
And that's basically your justification for meeting
Yep.
all your new teammates.
And I love
whatnot.
that, because it feels like a crime caper then, doesn't it? You're going recruiting your crew.
Yeah.
I love it. It's such a clever mechanic to set the story up.
I think it does a little bit better of it doesn't set up like a ticking clock quite yet either, because I think that's one of the things with Mass Effect 1 where it's like, oh, Saren and Sovereign are gonna destroy the universe and do something. They're conniving. And then it's like, but we need to go do these 3 other things and then a 4th thing. And then you could just explore if you want to, because you're gonna get little missions here and there, so you can, like, it's the video game stuff where you have to level up so you can take on
Right.
the big bad at the end. But this one, it doesn't feel as pressing. So you're never like, okay, you're building camaraderie as a team is basically the point of this game until you get to the collector base at the end.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's really clever, I think, too, because like the structure of the game, as you mentioned, the main thrust is you're going on these missions to recruit people, and then also that's punctuated with like some more story focused stuff where it's like, okay, we're attacking this base, or these guys are being attacked or whatever. And then you also have the opportunity as the course of the game goes on to do optional-ish missions for each character that's like, here's my deal, we got to resolve my story. And so like I think there's this one of the things that comes out of Mass Effect, and I think BioWare generally with KOTOR and Dragon Age and Jade Empire to a lesser extent, is this sense that like the core of the game is like the relationships and the dialogue with the characters, right? Where you're hanging out on the ship and just talking to people and seeing what they have to say. And then BioWare sort of structures the game around that with Mass Effect 2, where like you can play the game without doing any of the loyalty missions, but then you're sort of missing like the soul of the game to some degree, where like the core is finding these guys, figuring out their deal, learning about them, helping them resolve their shit before you go off to your certain death, maybe, It's just a really cool way of recognizing like what sort of the sauce was in the first game and like building your game around that.
And that's it. And you're getting these people, and you are literally going into a suicide mission at the end. So they're going to want to be loyal, right? Or you're going to want them to be loyal. Again, that makes sense in the confines of the story as well, right?
Yeah, it's just a really smart way to structure this game around all that stuff. Yeah.
So do you guys have favorite new crew members from Mass Effect 2? And they blew out the squad in this one too. I think there's 10, 11 squad members? Or no, 12, I think.
2 of them, I believe, were with DLC, right? And then
yeah, Kasumi and Zaid, who is somehow worse than Kaidan.
And then one of them, if you bought the game new, you automatically kind of get Zaid, which I'm sure we can talk about later in terms of like the DLC structure. But aside from those 2, I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember all how many characters you have, but it's a sizable amount. Yeah.
I think it's 12, maybe 10. But I know they even out.
Yeah, it is 12 if you count the DLC characters, which at this point, if you're playing Legendary Edition, are built in.
They're included. Yeah. I really dig Kasumi. She's she's fun. She's got like a little black cat energy to her. She's mysterious. You don't know if she's human or if she's some kind of humanoid alien. But really for me, the crew breaks down to, as my 2 favorites are probably still Garrus and then Grunt.
Yeah. Yeah, you see, I had this conversation as well with people. I really like Grunt. And again, because of the story as well. He's got to go and do his proving, hasn't he? It's he's a tank born, as he keeps saying. So there's that longing. I agree with you, Josh. Kasumi, I wish there was more on her. I wish there was either a callback in the later game. I wish there was a spin-off of her, because I think the mission you do for her as well, the loyalty mission, is very different. It feels very different to the rest of the game, isn't it?
It's a heist mission. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun. And there's some really cool Easter eggs with that one too. Like there's a Dragon Age ogre, because this game came out just after Dragon Age Origins came out. So there's like a statue in the guy's vault of an ogre, and they have like all these little lore bits where like they're talking about like the Turian Titanic and stuff like that too.
Yeah, Kasumi's a good one, and she's one I don't think of as often, just because, like, I'm sure I mentioned this when we talked about Mass Effect 1 / the trilogy as a whole last time, but for both of 2 and 3, and 1, I guess, even though the 1 is less consequential, I didn't do any of the paid DLC on the first run. So, like, when Mass Effect 2 comes out, there's a mission, if you buy it brand new, that's packed in with the game, that's all the Zaid stuff, and that's it. And then if you wanted the Kasumi stuff, if you wanted Shadow Broker, if you wanted, I think there was another one, it was all paid DLC, and I just never got
Arrival.
Yeah, I think I either beat it or just didn't want to spend the money. But, like, I think it was a thing where I probably had beaten it before the DLC came out, and then I was like, well, I'm not going to go play all that stuff again, and I'm playing something else now. So it wasn't until the Legendary Edition that I actually played all that DLC and saw the Kasumi stuff. And she's great as like a character, as like a party member, and then, like you guys say, her bespoke mission is really solid. But it's not one that I'm always like thinking about, because the ones I'm thinking about are the ones where I remember as like, when I played it for the first time, I had my mind blown as a young adult in 2010. But then I'm looking at this list, and it's like I'm like, oh, that's my favorite, and then oh no, that's my favorite.
There are a real solid handful of great characters I see in this one. Mordin as well. I think Mordin becomes a favourite of mine from this and the next game. Jack, if you take away the obvious, the character design, the costume they put her in, I think Jack for me is another really interesting character. Both her background and then what she does become in the third game if she survives.
Oh yeah.
And even Legion. Legion is a great character.
Legion's fascinating. Yeah,
Legion's great.
There's only a couple of characters really I don't like. I mean, you mentioned one, Josh. Zaid is just really underworked. It's almost he's just Mr. Angry, isn't he? we just need someone
he's
who's
a stereotypical mercenary dude. Like he's a mercenary boss who's been wronged. Like he got undercut by a partner, and so now he's out for revenge. Like there's nothing interesting about his story, and there's not much interesting about him in terms of anything he has to say, because he basically tells the same stories that like Rex tells, just they're not interesting for whatever reason it may be.
And I think he's a solid party member, but I wonder how much of that is like, I would be curious to know during development how much they know, like, okay, this is going to be free DLC. So it's just like part of the game that is going to come included, but it's like not technically part of the $60 people are spending, and it's not going to be part of the $15 people are spending later for Kasumi, for Liara, all that stuff. So maybe it's just like a thing that just didn't get as much attention. Or maybe it's a thing where they were like, this is kind of our weakest bit. We need some pack-in DLC. So we're just going to toss this in, even though there's not much to it. But it is, I think Mass Effect 3 also had free DLC that was like some kind of vehicle mission, where it's a thing where like you can. This is like an era where that's happening a lot.
That was Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 3 completely got rid of the vehicles. That was the Firewalker missions, which
that's right.
Those can be completely skipped. They add nothing to the game other than a vehicle moment.
It's a period where I think there's a strong push from publishers to kind of undercut the used games market by giving you some incentive to buy new, whether that was a pack in DLC or access to the online mode. That, if you buy used, if the code's in there, you don't know if it's good or not, right?
Well, Mass Effect was part of Project $10, right? Wasn't it? If I remember right,
yep.
The EA.
Mass Effect 2 and 3.
Yeah, and so like I think there's a lot of games that are just kind of getting DLC that is they can technically put in the on the box like, oh, you get this bonus for buying new, but then it's also just like kind of a throwaway thing that like they're giving it to you because it's not the thing they spent a lot of time developing or like writing, So I think maybe Zaid is part of that cadre of stuff. I think he was free, right? Like I think that was part of it.
He was an in the box character,
Yeah.
So he was the $10 character essentially.
Because you mentioned the vehicle missions being in 2 actually. Now I'm second guessing myself, but
the Project Firewalker stuff where you get like a hovercraft instead of the Mako.
Yeah.
Which the hovercraft, it was a nothing add-on. It comes in with the Project Overlord DLC, I think, as well. But if you don't do the Firewalker, you still get the whatever the hovercraft is. I forget what it's called now.
Aside from going off that tangent, I think the only character like in this list that I'm seeing that is not like I don't immediately have a baseline of like I'm into them is probably Samara. And I just nothing against her. I just never got that. I never used her much. I never did.
I started using her a little bit more towards the end of the game because her throw ability is really useful against the husks, especially in the final mission, because you can just use the throw ability and it recharges really quickly, and you can just throw them off a cliff or throw them off a ledge and they're gone. So like that ability is really handy, and I think that's one of the reasons why I worked towards the adept class in recent years, is because it comes with that class as well. So you can double up on it. It's basically like a shotgun that recharges a little faster.
Then you've also got like Jacob and Miranda are sort of like the Caden and Ashley analogs in terms of like the 2 humans you get to start with. But I think they're like much more interesting characters than either of those. Even though I think Ashley on the spectrum of the trilogy is an interesting character, but like I think Miranda's got a really cool backstory. I don't think Jacob's is super interesting, but he's also like he seems like as a character he's like a solid dude, right? So I'm not like annoyed by him.
He's kind of a parallel to your Shepherd. He's a guy who was in the military, in the human military, and for whatever reason he joined up with Cerberus because he saw them as like the lesser of 2 evils, and he's just trying to do his part to help humanity. Like he's not overtly racist. He just wants to do good things with what he can, and I think he is more interesting than Caden, where Caden is basically just like, I have a bomb in my head and I don't like it.
I was going to say, without probably wanting to alienate a load of the listeners, but it's a low bar you're setting there about making him more interesting than Caden, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But kind of jokes aside, the thing about Jacob is, again, I think he's not that they didn't develop his character enough in the sense of like Miranda's mission is quite compelling. There's a compelling humanity to the story, or a human element. Even Samara, the whole thing with her daughters, and even in the 3rd game, there's quite a compelling thing of what she's trying to do, to kind of bring her daughter to justice. There's
that's true. That's true.
That thing that compels you to play it. Whereas Jacob, it just feels a shame that he just feels he's not quite there character development.
His story basically breaks down to he's got daddy issues.
Yeah.
And his whole thing is like he's a solid dude, right? Like he's not.
Yeah.
Everyone else is kind of like a little grayer or shadier,
morally ambiguous.
Even like they even take some pains. Like Garrus is kind of pretty much a straight shooter in the first one, I guess pun intended, and then they sort of take pains to kind of gritty him up a little bit between the second one, right? Where like after the accident, he goes off and kind of goes rogue and has had some of his own tough times, and then he's got to kind of come back from that too a little bit.
Well, even in the first one, Garrus, if you're playing Paragon, you've got to keep him reined in a bit, haven't you? Because he wants to. I can't remember if it's
he wants to go bad cop a little bit.
Yeah. So even him, there is that element of everybody. He's everyone's favorite character. But yeah, if you left him to his own devices,
that's true. That's
tearing over everyone. So
yeah, he's like cops have to follow the law, and that sucks.
Yeah, so that's the thing, and I think that's what for me the characters I like. Like I mentioned Jack as well. The whole background of her, where she has to go back and destroy that kind of prison she kind of grew up in. And Mordin's got the whole, if we're jumping into spoiler territory now already, but the whole Krogan element to Mordin's backstory. I think it's those drama or dramedy kind of elements to a lot of the characters that I think Zaid we don't see. Is just he's angry with someone who double crossed him. And Jacob, Josh, you summed it up in one sentence there, daddy issues.
Speaking of Jack, in my most recent playthrough, I usually will romance Yeoman Kelly Chambers as my femme shep, but like obviously because she gets abducted in the mission before the suicide mission kicks off, you don't really get like a romance. You just have like a fun flirtatious thing with her, and then she's like, "I'll feed your fish." You're like, "Thanks, I don't like having dead fish in my room." But this time around, I was like, maybe I'll romance Jack. I haven't done a romance with Jack just because, like what you said, Dan, her lack of a costume design kind of always bugged
Yeah.
me. And so I was always just like, oh, she's the overt, like you have Miranda who is like fully clothed, but an overtly sexualized character. And then you have Jack who is also fully sexualized, but like in a different way.
Yeah.
It's something that never appealed to me. They explicitly say that she is kind of pansexual, if not just bisexual, but apparently you cannot romance Jack as a femshep.
Oh.
I looked it up, and apparently there was we'll just say a conservative news outlet at the time who was upset at Mass Effect 1 for having the
Yeah.
opportunity for your femshep to have sex with a female alien, and they were gonna make Jack a queer option for your femshep, but because of quote unquote backlash for a game that hadn't even come out yet, they removed that option during production.
Well, yeah, but that's a thing. Interesting thing. Ugh, can't talk. An interesting thing to touch on because I think I at least forget until just now that the first game set off a minor firestorm in conservative media, right? Where there's like a famous screenshot from a Fox News segment that you have these sort of very tame, very not terribly sexy sex scenes in the first one, and then you
Mhm.
have like on Fox News are talking about the sex box, because it's there's this game where you can fuck, right? So I that's like I think that's regrettable, but also not surprising, I guess. They're like, we don't want to make these people mad again, so we're just gonna
Yeah.
play it a little safer.
But Josh, on that, I know in the early runs, a couple of times I did romance Jack because I think sometimes I try to really play it like a character, and I think Shepard and Jack are probably the perfect couple in the sense they're both kind of almost like have had their troubles in the past and almost shouldn't be in a relationship, if you know what I mean. Like Shepard,
Yeah.
especially with what we know, it feels like they're almost the perfect couple out of everyone for me, in the sense that they're not a perfect couple.
An opposites attract kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there something I'm trying to remember now? And I've never done like a real Jack romance. I tend to lean at Liara, which means I don't do much romance at all in the second game.
Mm.
Am I wrong that there's like some suboptimal thing that happens if you romance Jack? And like, is it just like you get a bad ending for her, or she? I can't remember. There's a couple like I think if you hook up with Samara's daughter, right? She like fucking kills you and you die.
If I remember with Samara's daughter, Morinth, I don't think you die, or at least maybe you do. I haven't done that one since the game came out. So that one, man, now I have to go back and play Mass Effect 2 again.
You just finished.
I think she can kill you in the mission, can't she? If you let her seduce, I can't remember,
Yes.
but Samara will die and Morinth can take the place, right? And then I can't remember what can happen there.
Yeah, from there I don't know how the romance option works.
According to Google's AI overview, which I don't trust, I don't like, but I'm not going to go clicking around a bunch of links while we're on mic. But according to that, I think you cannot like have a true romance. Like you can like hook up with her earlier in the game than like the big moment at the end for most romances, right? But if you do that before you do her loyalty mission, it like locks you out of that. Where like you can't do a true romance with her, but you have the option to like, hey, you just want to fuck. If that's not true, I apologize, and also don't trust or use Google's AI overview that they force you to use. But I don't want to click around like IGN or whatever while you guys are talking and then be like, oh, what are you saying?
I mean, I think it's largely inconsequential just because, as we were saying earlier, Samara's not an extraordinarily interesting character. And if you kill her and bring in Morinth as your adept character, I don't think there's too much that changes in terms of how the plot plays out, other than instead of meditating in the middle of the room, she's just kind of sitting off in the corner. And then she just kind of gives you really snarky conversation bits.
It's just the more like explicitly dark-sided
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
And it's just about having that other really strong biotic in the suicide mission, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that also plays up in Mass Effect 3, which obviously we're not going to dive too deeply into, but we talked a little bit about Morden, his loyalty mission, Samara's loyalty mission. Those two have ramifications going into Mass Effect 3, where Morden, if you choose to destroy the data on the genophage, that will kill the female Krogan that you rescue at some point in Mass Effect 3, because she hasn't been properly treated and she can't be cured of the genophage properly. And then with Samara in Mass Effect 3, there's a sequence where you go to like a temple where a bunch of Ardat Yakshi are just kind of being held,
Yeah.
not against their will, but it's just like an internment camp that's very nice, like a day spa, where they just kind of are going to live out the rest of their days and not hurt anyone. If you save Samara and her loyalty mission, Samara will show up. If you don't, Samara is obviously not there. And then there's another, I forget what the sorry Reaper character is called, like a Wraith or something. You will see one that is explicitly named Morinth, because Morinth tried to do what Samara did, but she got converted into a Reaper at some point during her rescue opportunity.
But also in that mission you're talking about there in 3, again, I know we want to stay away from that as possible, but yeah, those in that, Samara loses her other daughters there as well. So that's what I'm saying about Samara as a character over the 2 games, is it becomes interesting because of what she has to go through.
And how you continually have to stop her from killing herself, because she's like, oh man, I'm so unworthy of life because I've given birth to nothing but Ardat Yakshi. And then you have to continually save her and be like, don't throw your life away. You can still do good things. I do want to talk about Miranda a little bit, just because when I play as my man Shep, she's my bae.
Yeah.
In my most recent Mass Effect 3 run through, I actually even converted from Liara into Miranda just because I wanted to. I think I told you, Dan, there was a moment where you have a heart to heart with Miranda, and you can either break things off with her or you can keep things going. And true to what I was trying to do, I was trying to stick with my Mass Effect 1 romance. And in Mass Effect 3, if you break up with her, she walks away crying. And I'm like, I can't make Yvonne Strahovski cry. I can't do it. And so I like reloaded the game and continued my romance with Miranda. But there's some interesting stuff with her, because through the Shadow Broker DLC, you get like additional dossiers and you can like peep on your people and see their emails. And they add in this Miranda subplot where she wants to have a child and she wants to get pregnant. Through the emails that you read through the Shadow Broker dossiers, you find out that she cannot have children. So it's kind of an interesting character moment to add in just through a nonverbal uh, peep at her private emails.
Nonverbal invasion of privacy.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, she's Cerberus, so she's kind of given away all that stuff anyway. But it does add a little extra depth to a character who the most depth you really get is through her loyalty mission, where you find out that she's a clone. She has a sister who is also a clone, and she's trying to protect her sister clone from her father and save her from the life that she had. And she also doesn't value herself as a person because she's a clone and she's modified to be as perfect as possible. So there's an interesting dynamic of how much of it is her own willpower and how much of it is her creation. I find a lot of that with her interesting.
Yeah, I think when I first played, and this is, 2010. I think Chuck has been on the air for a couple of years, and
we're all in love with Yvonne Strahovski.
Yeah, however old we were like, ooh, pretty lady, and now she's in the video game, and I can talk to her and kiss her and stuff.
Romancer.
I think this also happens in, and maybe it's user error on my part, but like in Dragon Age 2, there is a character who's like very similar, like the pirate lady who is like the classically super hot lady, like whatever, who's like sassy and fun and whatever. In both cases, I was like, that's the one. I'm going for it. and I, at least in the case of Dragon Age 2, like she is like very difficult to actually romance. So I ended up romancing somebody else kind of by default. And I found myself in a similar boat with Miranda, and I don't know if it's because they make her a little harder than other characters, or like I just don't choose the right options, or I think sometimes whenever the heart thing pops up, I'm like, ooh, that one. And then I end up like, then it ends up being kind of like a romance roulette at the end. Like, who'd you get? Because you chose the heart every time you could. And then sometimes it doesn't break the way you want it to. That's one, the white whale for me, so to speak, where like when I was younger, I was like, ooh, I gotta date Miranda. And then it didn't work out. And then I ended up like, well, I guess canonically Shepard's just true to Liara forever,
And that is the thing if you choose Liara, right? Because you can only she's mainly only in the first and the third game, right? And it leaves that sort of kind of gap if you're trying to play it again as the character.
Yeah, and then I'll tell you this: if in the Legendary Edition, if you care about achievements, telling her that you're still her ride or die in Shadowbroker does not count as romancing her.
I still don't have
you
that
want-
achievement. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that says a lot about me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want that achievement for doing a romance in all 3 games, that's not the way to do it.
We'll close out the conversation about the romance stuff here. I just really want to quickly touch on the fact that I don't think there are many interesting romance options. I think that's part of the thing that we're talking about here, because obviously you can't romance the Krogan. They don't want anyone messing with the turtle boy. But you can romance Thane, Garrus, Samara, and Kelly, I believe, in as Femshep, and then as Manshep, you can also romance Jacob, but again, who wants daddy issues to have to deal with. And then as Manshep, you can romance Miranda, Samara, Jack, and Kelly, and there might be a few others.
You can do Tally as well, because I think in my first
That's right.
playthrough, I got to the end and I didn't get the romance, and I was like, I got to reload a save and like just get that scene so I can get that achievement for romancing somebody. And Tally was like, "Let's do it." So I was like, "All right, let's go."
In my heart, Tally and Garrus are meant to be together, so I can't do that.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
also, I think she's supposed to be very young. So, like,
Yeah.
I think in the first game she's supposed to be like 15 or 16, and then in this one she's
Oh,
like
boy.
just barely 18.
Sorry. Non-canonical. I just did it for the achievement.
She's
Non-canonical.
she's an alien as well, so like who knows what their biological age is.
All right, we can't. We're gonna get canceled. We're gonna get canceled.
But yeah, I never found like any of the romance options to be truly interesting like they were in the first one. Like even with just the 3 between Kaden, Ashley, and Liara, those at least felt kind of compelling in terms of who you're going to pick. Like they felt a little more reflective of who you were. Where this one, it felt more just kind of tacked on. Like, well, you can romance someone if you want to.
Yeah, that's part of these games. That's not really the point this time around, but it's in there, so you can.
Let's dive into just the final suicide mission, and then we'll call it a day. Like final thoughts on Mass Effect 2 as well. So if you, depending on how you play the game, you can do all the loyalty missions and do all the upgrades that your crew members can suggest, and that will save them. But true to the game and the choose your own adventure style of the game, if you don't do some of the upgrades, even if you do the loyalty mission, some characters will die, and vice versa. If you, depending on if they're loyal, and at certain points in the suicide mission, you can choose to have someone go do a thing, and they can either die while they go off and do the thing on their own, or they can result in the deaths of other crew members because the person you chose is not loyal, and through bad leadership, they end up killing themselves and their crew through just bad stratagems and whatever. The main crux of the game with in terms of the stories, the collectors are actually Protheans who have been reconstructed into essentially worker drones for the Reapers, and the Reapers have taken control and they're trying to build a human Reaper. How do you guys feel about the ripple effect that the suicide mission creates, and like the strategies that you have to come up with when choosing your squad mates and who leads whatever groups or whatever specialists you have to do?
What I would say about that final mission is the first time you play it is probably the most impactful, because you kind of get no real... There are little things here and there, but this was obviously back in the day where there weren't too many walkthroughs and guides on it. You didn't realise how much was going on in the background about that mission, like the loyalty missions, the upgrades, other than a few throwaway lines here and there, and choosing the right people. So you could lose a lot of the squad,
and even just down to the mission itself. There's
Yeah.
like who are you going to send here?
Yeah.
Even if you have everything else optimized, you make the wrong choice about who's going to go in the vent or whatever else. Maybe that's the wrong choice, and that person dies, and a bunch of side characters die too.
And that to me mirrors the fact that it's got a fantastic opening. You've then got a final mission with genuine peril, you know, to up the stakes.
The first time I played through the final mission, I remember thinking, I had the strategy guide and I was just like, yeah, I'm just going to do whatever. And I didn't even think about the thermal vent that starts off the mission, where you have to select a squad member to go and do something in the vents to help you progress through the ship. And I chose Miranda, and Miranda ended up burning alive in the vents once you get towards the end of the thing. Which, when you think about it, like, yeah, the only ones who can do that are Legion or Tally, because they have exosuits. They're, in Legion's case, he is a robot and he doesn't really have any of that stuff to worry about. But I just remember being like, what the hell did I just do to my lady?
Like you guys said, it's got so many moving parts, and it's so easy to have those really cool moments of a kind of emergent but also authored gameplay, right? Where there's so much they're keeping from you, and so many ways they're kind of tricking you into possibly making the wrong choice. I will admit I have never been able, like, I'm all for a game that's like, I'm just like going in and like, that's, whatever my story is my story, even if it's not optimal, right? That is like one game where I've never been able to brook that. Like, every time I've played Mass Effect 2, which is only a couple times now, it's like, oh, it's time for the suicide mission. I've got a guide next to me. Like,
Yeah,
I'm gonna find out. They go here, they go here, they go here. Everybody comes home.
yeah.
I've never been able to stomach the idea of like, oh no, Tally didn't come back or whatever.
It's funny you say that because I've got a story about that. But yeah, so just to clear for people if you haven't played it. So you can lose some of the squad on the way to the mission if you haven't got the upgrades and they're not
Yep.
loyal. You can lose people, as Josh found out, by putting the wrong person in the wrong kind of leadership bit. But even there's a couple of bits where you have to send a character back to the Normandy with some survivors. You're not actually playing through with them. You don't see them. But if you make the wrong choice there, they can die as well. So even off screen, you can
Yep.
lose characters. But the thing about Talia, I was saying to when I last played it last year, I think it was. I got to Mass Effect 3. I thought I'd saved everyone. Got to Mass Effect 3, and the thing in Mass Effect 3 on the Normandy, you've got the list of people the crew that have gone, and I saw Tali's name on it, and I thought, what the hell? What's happened there? And I don't know. I must have looked away. I don't know what happened, but I was getting ready to replay the final mission, but I thought, no, I'll stick with it. And I actually had a different experience totally then with the Quarians in Mass Effect 3. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah, that's interesting.
I'm with you, Matt, in the sense of it is the one I tried desperately to now make sure I've not made that one slip up along the way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. And then you fight a giant baby. Is that what that
A
thing is?
giant Reaper baby, yeah, that is in the shape of a human. That's another one of the things that this game does so well is that if you close out the mission with, like, this comes into effect a little bit too during Jack's loyalty mission. If you bring Miranda with you for the Reaper mission or Jack's mission, you get a little bit of different dialogue trees because obviously Miranda up to this point is loyal to Cerberus because Cerberus viewed her as more than just a clone and a pretty lady with a big brain. They like let her do stuff, and obviously Project Lazarus was one of her things too. But through the game, if you end up with her as a loyal member and you bring her on the final mission, she will actually start siding with Shepard as opposed to the elusive man, who we haven't even really talked much about, played wonderfully by Martin Sheen.
Yeah.
There's little things that the game adds in just based on the crew members that you bring along because they have a little bit of a ripple effect. So like Miranda adding in a little bit of extra dialogue and bringing her on that final mission, that final run, kind of brings the narrative a little bit more full circle for me.
Yeah, a lot of little like character grace notes if you put in the time to. Which is like I mentioned earlier that the loyalty missions are optional-ish because like you don't have to do them, but they really like want you to do them.
Yeah, like we were talking about with the speedrunners, like not only are they probably skipping all of the loyalty missions along with exploiting the glitches in the game, like who the heck probably survives to that point if you to the final mission
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah,
not
it's just
doing any of
Shepard.
that. So let's talk a little bit about DLC and then we'll get out of here because this game had a lot of DLC as we were talking about earlier. You had the Zaid mission, which I think his mission is fun, especially because you can slap him around a bit as a dickbag character. And then you had Kasumi's, who again the really fun heist mission. You had Project Overlord, which I have a little bit of a gripe with, but I can also forgive it because of the time it came out. But the idea of I think I think it's
Yeah.
David.
Yeah.
He's a savant, but he's also autistic, which is why he's a savant with mathematics and why he can speak to the Geth. And I didn't really pick up on it until I think a playthrough I had last year, and I was just like, oh, he's autistic. I forgot he's autistic. Like that's dumb. The autism is a superpower trope. Mass Effect, you're better than that.
And in 2010, maybe I think it was maybe not as much of a thing that was known in terms of like bad tropes.
Mm-hmm.
And also like I would not be surprised if some of that stuff just arises almost on accident where they're not even necessarily thinking about this character's autistic, right? It's just like these are the tendencies that we associate with this thing. We just know a lot more about sensitivities around that kind of thing since then.
Which is why, again, I forgive it for what it was doing because that was 15 years ago, and
Yeah.
how we perceive autism even now is continually changing, and we're understanding it more. But it is just something that I was like, oh, that's not something I really enjoy and thought about in this context in this game.
Yeah.
No, the thing that stays me about that one though again is about that human element, because it's his brother that's putting him into these experiments, and it's that
Yeah.
for me is the thing that always stays with me. And there is a callback in the third game, which we'll talk about that when we do
And
that. But
that's probably one of the better lines in the trilogy, really, in that third game, which we'll try to talk about if we can survive another 2 years.
Which is that's another fun thing too, and not we're not talking about Mass Effect 3 today, but one of the fun things about not doing any of this stuff when it comes out is like just how, in retrospect now, playing Mass Effect 3 for the first time when it hits Xbox 360, just the ways that they're like basically every character from that DLC shows up and is like, oh, by the way, this happened, but you weren't there, so it went really badly. Like at the time I was like, oh, what's that about? I don't know. Bye.
And then I think the big DLC that should get a little bit of a talk here before we go is The Arrival, which is essentially a solo mission for Shepard. I forget what I think it's because it's something that Admiral Hackett sends you on to do, and so because you're working for Cerberus, he's like, "Don't bring anyone else, just you. You're the only Alliance person, so you're gonna go rescue this scientist, and we're gonna find out what's going on because we've lost contact with this base." And turns out that they have all been under indoctrination, and they're working towards bringing the Reapers back through a relay that is near a Batarian colony. And through the events of the DLC, you end up destroying the Batarian colony and the mass relay that's there. But it's a really good DLC. I think it's probably the second best DLC after the Citadel and Mass Effect 3. It adds so much extra depth to the game, even though I think it works in the context of either pre or post suicide mission. Because I think it's supposed to be set up for Mass Effect 3.
Yeah, like explicitly, I think if I remember right, in Mass Effect 3, it opens where you're back on Earth, but you're on trial, basically.
You're court-martialed for the event,
and
of
it's
that,
because of the stuff with the Batarians. So I think this might have even released close to when Mass Effect 3 came out.
That sounds right.
It was sort of a thing where with all the other DLC, and this is all from memory, and again, I didn't buy this all when it was coming out, so forgive me if I'm a little off base, where it's like a couple months after the game comes out, they start dropping these where it's like, I don't know, once a month, once every 3 months or something. Here's a $10 DLC that gives you some chunk of story. And then this one was like a couple years later where it's like, this is set up for the third game.
I just did a quick look up. It released in late March 2011, so almost exactly 1 year ahead of Mass Effect 3. So it would stand to reason that they announced Mass Effect 3 and then this DLC dropped shortly after.
Yeah, and then, so that one's a big deal for Mass Effect 3. And then I would also argue that the other load-bearing one was the Shadowbroker DLC.
Yes.
Which is the one everyone raves about, which I, again, didn't play until the Legendary Collection comes out. But that's, where Liara's one moment, who is otherwise absent from the game, in the main game, and about how she sort of becomes the Shadowbroker and dealing with the Shadowbroker, who's this character you've heard about in the background previously, but this is really dealing with what their whole deal is and what Liara's up to, and then totally sets her up as her role in the third game. Which is another funny thing where you recruit her in Mass Effect 3. If you haven't played that DLC, she's like, oh yeah, between games I became the Shadowbroker, don't worry about it.
The thing about that DLC though, and it is good DLC, is that the Shadowbroker is like a race you've not seen before, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's like there's so little then done about that. You've just met this new race of alien, and they're quite an interesting looking one, right? And that's it. You just destroy them, and that's it. You never see them.
And it's a funny thing too, where the fact that it is a certain kind of video game is cutting against what the whole thing is about. Because here's this guy who's all about wielding information against people, data is his weapon, and he's harvesting all this stuff. And then the end of the DLC is, he's also a giant monster who will take you into an arena and you have to shoot him to death.
Yeah. The Shadowbroker DLC is really good too. Really easy to trigger, so if you're not quite ready for that DLC, you're kind of out of luck without having to restart to a certain point. So that's one that always kind of bothers me, because it's give Liara the intel, and then it's okay, we've triggered the start of this. You're on the path. You can't get off it now.
Yeah, I just want to shout out the Crash Site DLC, because whilst it's a nothingy DLC in the sense of you don't need to do it, and there's not much going on in it, I think, again, if we put it in the context of the openings, it's where you've you visit the crash site of the original
That's right.
Normandy.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
You pick up the dog tags and you have flashbacks, like still image flashbacks to the characters, and then you have to place the statue. Again, I think it's just something that you could see Shepard wanting to do, is pay respect
Yeah.
to the crew. So whilst it's a very blink and you'll miss it DLC, and you honestly don't have to do it. If you're playing it as Shepard, I
Right.
think it's a fitting tribute to what happens at the start of the game.
I like collecting the dog tags. I think the flashback images of the characters lingers a little too long.
Yeah.
And I really don't want to relive anything with Caden as long as I have to. So
I'd
when he
forgotten all
flashes
about
up,
him.
I'm like, get off my screen.
Yeah. Who's that guy? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the one who doesn't make it past Act 1, right? Or Act 2 in the game.
Yeah. Shepard picks up those dog tags like, oh, yeah, that guy.
It's like Mae Whitman's character in Arrested Development. Who? Him? So yeah, I think it's easy to say we all have very fond memories and very much still harbor love for this game. The DLC, the Legendary Edition. I think the thing for me, it might be a minor thing, but one of the things for me that really made this game so much more enjoyable compared to Mass Effect 1 is that they got rid of the inventory system. That inventory system in the first game, to me, is atrocious because they just overload you with so much useless crap. And like you could sell it for a lot of money and buy all the good stuff, but it just having to go through and like designate it for trash and either break it down into Omnigel or sell it, wait till you find a vendor to sell it. So much effort that I think most of my time or half my time in my first few playthroughs 15, 17 years ago now was just dedicated to going through, looking up the stats of these things and being like trash, trash, trash. This one, without having to do that, I think they did a really good job of making money an actual commodity because I do feel like just selling everything that wasn't like heat sinks and synthetic damage or organic damage add-ons to your weapons, money actually became like a commodity in Mass Effect 2, where you actually had to think about the things you needed to buy and like the armor sets that you wanted. So I think they did a good job of cleaning that sort of thing up.
And I've just got 3 random other things I want to shout out in this game, and they are random, right? So one is Mordin singing Gilbert and Sullivan. If you do the right conversation tree, I will always do that. I will always have to do that. This is a really bizarre thing to say, but I love how, as Shepard, as the commander of the Normandy, and you know you're saving the galaxy from impending Reaper doom, etc. You still have to go get some like potatoes and onions for the chef in there. I love that little random again moment of normality. But the other thing is a character who she appears in all the games, but I've said before, I would love to have more background on her, is Dr. Chukwas as well. We get her to introduce her love for brandy, I think, in this game, don't we?
Yeah.
And I just think she seems to be like a fascinating character. I think there should be a DLC where she tells you more of her stories.
Maybe a 15th anniversary patch.
Captain Anderson DLC where she and Captain Anderson go on a mission. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
We didn't even really talk much about like Omega as a new setting, like basically the new Citadel. Arya, played by Trinity herself. I'm forgetting her.
Carrie-Anne Moss.
Carrie-Anne Moss, which like there are a couple of big celebrities that came on for this one. Carrie-Anne Moss, Martin Sheen, obviously Keith David as Anderson. Yep. Thank you. I can only hold so much information, and a lot of it is being taken up by Paw Patrol and Bluey facts now, apparently. But yeah, it's kind of cool. And as we mentioned before, Yvonne Strahovski, some pretty known names at the time. And I mean, obviously Carrie-Anne Moss is known. Keith David is known throughout most nerd cultures as Goliath in the Gargoyles cartoon and so many other different things. TikTokers would know him as "Welcome to Hell, motherfucker." But yeah, just a fantastic game, and I think pretty well regarded as like the best of the trilogy, even though I think Mass Effect 3 continues to clean up some of the combat stuff. But overall, in terms of like storytelling, characters, and just overall vibe and gameplay loop, like it all just meshes wonderfully in this game.
Oh yeah, and I want to say special shout out as well for all the games, but the soundtrack as well. I think the soundtrack to the Mass Effect series is one I can sit down and listen to. You know, it's just a great sort of set of music.
Something that's interesting to me about this game that I like to think about And this is sort of touching on what you guys were just talking about, or what you were just talking about, Josh, with the combat, is like, it's obviously a great game. I love it to death. I love all these games, but it's also such a fascinating artifact, like, of its time in a couple of different ways. It is like so representative of like where BioWare is and it goes from here, and also like where gaming was at in 2010, where, you know, it's this time where like I said before, they're trying to undercut used game sales whatever way they can. They're trying to get people to buy games and stay bought into them, even if they're single player experiences. So like you have, you know, the free packs and DLC, or like the multiplayer modes, and then you have like support for a bunch of multiplayer packs afterwards. And then with BioWare, you also have this thing where it represents sort of a shift away from like their pure RPG, like computer RPG roots, right? Where Mass Effect is like the game that takes like the mostly RPG of Mass Effect 1 and streamlines it into something that's more of a shooter. And then that's kind of like the trajectory BioWare's been on since then. Like Dragon Age 2, Dragon Age, like all the Dragon Age games, Mass Effect Andromeda, are all like closer and closer in that like sort of action RPG or just action game with RPG elements. Since then, it's sort of like a weird Rosetta Stone of understanding BioWare as a company now. And it's also this weird thing where like it also comes out right in the midst of this period where every big game is trying to be a multimedia franchise, where, you know, there's novels for the first game, but this one is like there's comics tie-ins, there's novel tie-ins, there's all kinds of stuff that's like exploring things that are built-in hooks in the game, where it's like, here's a character, here's Arya, ooh, you want to know more about her? Here's her comic book miniseries or whatever, you know? It's just like an interesting moment in time that, aside from everything else, is just fascinating to think about, on top of like, it's also still a pretty great game.
Going back to what Dan said about Morden singing Gilbert and Sullivan, again, doxing us a little bit, Matt. We were in a production of Pirates of Penzance in high school. So
yeah,
to me, when he started singing that, I was like, I know this song. I know that one.
Yeah. Well, that's like the entire reason I know that song too. So.
All right. Well, let's call it a day here, gentlemen. Dan, please, once again, let everyone know who you are, what you do, and where they can find you.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. Dan from Casting Views. Pod releases every Sunday morning, and it's a podcast about anything and everything. So yeah, it'll be a random. It's like a potluck of subjects each week. So yeah,
you never know what you're gonna get.
Exactly.
It's a good time. It's a good listen. It is the best way to start my Sundays. So definitely check out Casting Views. I call it Sunday Fun Day for a reason, and it's because Dan is so lovely.
Thank you.
And Matt, please let everyone know about our Discord.
Yeah, Talking Smack has a Discord. We are all there, I believe, all three of us. If you like conversations like this, but really just wish you had them in text form, and really just wish you had walls of text from me specifically, come on in. We're all chill, we're all nice, and we're gonna have a good time. So
yep, and you can find the invitation link in our episode description, so click on that and you can join the Discord. You can follow us on all the social media platforms at Talking Smack Pod, including Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, Hive Social, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. Email us your thoughts, questions, reviews at tsmackpod@gmail.com. And I mean, as far as Mass Effect goes, we'll save all those up for another, what would it be, 2 years and 2 months? March 2027. We'll put it on the books now, so we can.
We can't let it go that long. Let's come back soon for an episode about the comics or some shit. I don't know.
There you go. I mean, you've already booked us for Superman Summer and
that's true.
Giltober or October.
Mass Effect March. Mass Effect March.
There you go.
Thank you to Leo Allen for musical themes, Beppo for our avatars, Retro Ale Studios for our Ricky avatar. Please like, subscribe, rate, review on your podcatcher of choice. If you're watching on YouTube, listening on YouTube, please hit that like button and that subscribe button. Oh, man. I'll edit that out. But most importantly, Dan, thank you so much for being here. Matt, thank you for being here. And
Thank you.
Dear listener, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us chat about this sort of thing. And again, if you have any thoughts, anything like that, join the Discord, share them. We have all sorts of conversation topics in there. So with that, take care, and we will see you next week. And Matt, just so you know, this outro is long, so you might want to get that tagline in before.
No. I'll wait till the end.
I warned you.
Well, we're still talking anyway, so who gives a shit,
I am
right?
the very model of a scientist Solarian. I've studied species Turian, Asari, and Batarian. I'm quite good at genetics as a subset of biology because I am an expert, which I know as a tautology. My xenoscience studies range from urban to agrarian. I am the very model of a scientist Solarian.
Play Mass Effect.
Maybe you
Maybe
should.
I should play Mass Effect again. Maybe that's what I'll do today.
I'm Commander Shepard, and this is my favorite
Podcast.
on the Citadel.